He's the author of Whip and Spur, winner of the Gold Line Press Fiction Award, and Welcome to Dead Horse and Your Other Life. Arnegard has published fiction, nonfiction, and poetry in the North American Review, the Atlanta Review, Barrow Street, Gulf Coast, the Missouri Review, Willow Springs, and others. His essay, Wind That Shakes the Sage, was chosen as the 2015 staff favorite at the Tishman Review. He's currently an English professor at Colorado State University at Pueblo. He has a PhD in creative writing from Ohio University and an MFA from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. In addition to his work as a teacher, he's been a farmer and ranch hand, wilderness guide, waiter, dishwasher, construction worker, and woodcutter. In the critical introduction to his dissertation, Farland, Arnegard argues for the need to treat indigenous knowledge systems as equal alternatives to Western thought when perceiving and explaining reality. In his collection, Whip and Spur, Arnegard writes wildness and isolation, the desert mesa, winter in Montana, the middle of nowhereness of North Dakota, places where making it to tomorrow is the daily occupation. For those who may be conjuring ideas of bucolic streams and lazy bunny-filled vistas, these are not those stories. Instead of romanticizing the rural, Arnegard shows its starkness and what it means to be truly alone. With bone-bare language and deliberate pacing, he depicts solitary lives near wilderness as the setting. In 17 Fences, from the collection Whip and Spur, Arnegard takes the reader to the last vestiges of farm country in Farland, North Dakota. Quote, between Alaska and Dakota, there are only 17 fences, 460 mountain peaks rising from tundra, dozens of salmon-choked streams. There are 68 towns, 300 frozen lakes, 221 memories, a runaway mother, a father's fist. While I wouldn't call Arnegard's characters marginal, they are on the verge. Their lives so tenuous that the reader can imagine them wisping away without much notice. Quote, it's amazing what we're capable of when it comes to survival, says the unnamed narrator in his starry Bonesaw. Indeed. Iver will be reading a short piece of fiction, is that true? Maybe, who knows? From his collection, as well as an essay about his time teaching in a Palestinian refugee camp. Is that true?
That is true.
Awesome. And I'm happy to announce Iver will officially be old tomorrow. Is that true? Happy birthday?
That might
No.
be true.
Okay. And my gift to you is I'm not going to start a song. How's that? Ladies and gentlemen, Iver Arnegard.
Okay. So if anyone wants to go out for drinks after this, for my last night as a 30-something-year-old, I would welcome it. Thanks so much, Linda, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here. Chibrasi, that was a great reading. It's an honor to read with you and to be part of this SOMOS reading series. So thanks to Veronica and Jan and everyone involved with this series. It's really an honor. This is the kind of place where freaks like me feel comfortable. Not necessarily the Harwood, but Taos in general. It's definitely part of the freak circuit. One of those places where certain misfits feel at home. Those of us who aren't comfortable treading the calmer waters of mainstream America, but prefer faster flowing rapids, an unexpected waterfall here and there, less predictability or stability, freaks like me who, for whatever reason, whatever genetic defect or character flaw, are drawn to chaos. Taos is a place where a lot of chaos just happens. Where for good or bad, right or wrong, life takes on a kind of improvisational spontaneity, a flow. Things can end up anywhere between a bad bounce and complete disaster. It can be scary, it can be dangerous, but is hardly ever boring. There are other places like this, of course, a circuit of them, really. I've lived in many and traveled through most, drawn to the company of other misfits and places of unparalleled natural beauty. Like Crestone, Colorado, one of the last towns I lived in before coming to Taos. I still go back to visit from time to time. This last summer I was passing through and stopped to see my friend Peter, an old river rat turned writer after running every rapid between the Grand Canyon and the Sawtooth and settling in a remote part of the San Luis Valley. After dinner, Peter's wife was putting the kids to bed, and he invited me up to the deck for some whiskey. As the sun sank behind the Rockies and the first few stars flickered on above the valley, we reminisced about the old days. A trip down memory lane in Crestone or Taos is never complete without recalling some of the colorful characters. Characters who rejected or felt rejected by mainstream America. I suspect many of them go so far as to rename themselves as part of their reinvention process. A kind of born-again baptism for hippies and self-proclaimed pagans. Electrum, Galaxy, Orca, Mountain. These are not Christian names. Eventually, as the sky darkened and the Milky Way stretched out overhead, its red and purple gases flowing across space and time, the conversation zeroed in on one particular character who didn't seem to have a name, Christian or otherwise. Remember that guy who wore all the tinfoil, I said? Peter took a sip of his rye. Yeah, he used to hang out at the Laughing Buddha, right? There in the Bliss, all over town, really. And he always wore aluminum foil wrapped around his body. What was that guy's name? I don't know, I said. Even for Crestone, he was out of left field. Peter pulled out a cigarette and lit it. Yeah, he said, blowing smoke over his head. Tinfoil Man definitely took the cake. I laughed. Tinfoil Man? Is that what we're calling him? Peter took a sip of whiskey and took another drag. Guess so, he said. Tinfoil Man had been a little scrawny, kind of a wimpy-looking guy. Picture the Wizard of Oz Tin Man with dreadlocks. And I was going to get dreadlocks for this prop, but I never got around to it. I was going to ask someone tonight on the street if I could cut off some of their dreads, but I decided not to. Still, he'd been bold enough to parade around in aluminum foil all day. Is bold the right word? Who knows? Maybe he even slept in all that flimsy armor. And you'd see him at the bar, the cafe, the fucking post office like that. He had no shame. The wildest part, no one looked at him funny, not in Crestone at least, whose cultural center, the Laughing Buddha bar, played host to everything from Grateful Dead cover bands to didgeridoo performers to community meetings on the benefits of ayahuasca, DMT, and peyote. No one even flinched. No one paused in the middle of a conversation when Tinfoil Man entered a restaurant or cannabis dispensary and blinded everyone with his suit of reflective armor. What the hell happened to that guy, I said, raising the glass to my lips. Peter shrugged. Hard to tell, man. Haven't seen him since you left. I mean, a guy like that wouldn't last a second on the streets of New York, Detroit, Baltimore. Shit, even Denver would eat him for breakfast. There aren't many places in the world where that guy is blending in. Peter took another drag and nodded. I bet he went to Taos. I laughed and drained my glass. Of course, where else? And from there, maybe Santa Fe. Maybe, I said. But Santa Fe might not be freaky enough for him. Peter raised his eyebrows. Sedona? There you go. Definitely part of the freak circuit, and definitely one of the few places that would welcome Tinfoil Man with open arms. Exactly, Peter said. And when he gets bored with Sedona, he moves on to Santa Cruz. Right. San Francisco, Shasta, Ashland, Eugene, Portland, Peter laughed. And if Tinfoil Man has no criminal record, which is highly unlikely, he crosses the border to Vancouver, BC, then hits Nelson on his way back to Missoula. Although checkered past or not, tinfoil alone might be reason enough to detain someone at the border. What about Asheville? I started pouring myself another glass. North Carolina? Maybe. If he catches a ride with a bunch of hippies who are on their way, but he'd have a lot of Midwest to cross, and Tinfoil Man would not do well in the heartland. All right, so no Asheville? Peter shook his head, probably not. What if he found the carload of hippies and had gas money? Gas money? Right. So from Missoula, where does he go? Peter shrugged. He needs to complete the circuit. Loop back to Crestone? You got it. But to get there, he has to cross Wyoming, and Wyoming could be a little awkward for Tinfoil Man. What about Jackson Hole? Only if he hops a train and it takes him all the way to Boulder. In Boulder, he panhandles for loose change down on Pearl Street, swings through Netherland to see some old friends, and hitches a ride back to Crestone. Peter looked out toward the distant lights of town. He could show up tonight. We should go downtown to the Buddha and buy him a drink. We both cracked up at that, but only because laughter and fear are controlled by the same part of the brain. And we both knew misfits like us, at any given moment, were only one or two wrong turns from being tinfoil men ourselves. Or would they be two right turns? Who's to say Tinfoil Man hasn't figured it all out, cracked the code, dialed, wild, and blessed, because he wasn't crazy. He was just expressing himself like Wombat and Luna, like Shadow and Dogbite Johnson. Actually, Dogbite really was crazy. Peter and I each took another drink, sharing a quiet moment as we gazed up at the dipper, pointing straight and true toward Polaris. Because who's to say, there's a little tinfoil man in all of us, a scary thought on multiple levels. But aren't we all seeking individuality, robed in our own reflective foils, hoping they just might deflect some of the cruelty and sadness around us, that wide open way a world would not let us come in? We all have more in common with the tinfoil man than we're comfortable admitting. Shave the dreadlocks, strip the aluminum, and the resemblance is shocking. Expression, identity, we all want it, and some of us, for whatever reason, crave chaos too. We not only invite danger and drama into our lives, we run to it and ride the same freaky tinfoil man misfit circuit from Sedona to San Francisco, Ashland to Asheville, and all communes in between. But not just any commune, places like Taos, where it feels like the circus is always in town. Around any corner here, you might catch your own reflection in a storefront window and stare into it, only to see the tinfoil man and all his gleaming glory staring right back through the glass. This next piece is kind of a departure from that in some ways. It's a little bit more serious, and it's from my memoir. It's a standalone chapter that was recently picked up by an anthology. It's actually a common reader that's going to be used in colleges across the nation, and I'm pretty proud of that. It's called Gender, a Reader for Writers, and this is about a Palestinian refugee camp I used to volunteer in when I taught and lived overseas in the Middle East. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. The Fourth World. They call Borsh al-Barashne the Fourth World, but that doesn't begin to describe the place. From a distance, this Palestinian refugee camp could be another rundown part of Beirut, but as we draw near, I see that Borsh makes even the poorest parts of the city look wealthy. I'm visiting this camp with my new friend Nick, whom I met just a few hours ago. I told him I'd help him teach his English class. After the last bus stop, it was almost a full kilometer's walk down the airport road where we took a left beneath an overpass. There, we began our trek down a nameless street, bordered on one side by a razor wire fence and on the other by an empty lot that's been converted to an impromptu dump. Men and women in ragged clothing dig through trash for anything they can salvage. The entrance to Borsh al-Barashne leads into a labyrinth of concrete, plywood, and twisted metal, and now I see why Nick calls it the maze. Alleyways shoot off in all directions, and as we pass the threshold of this walled-in camp, the intense sunlight of the day fades to a dim, dusky hue, as if we've entered some kind of otherworldly canyon. Refugees have built skeletal wooden shacks on top of cracked concrete dwellings. In places, above the wooden shacks, faded canvas tents have been propped up with 2x4s, branches, or sticks. The stench is overwhelming, and I wonder how much shit is mixed in with the dirt and grime everywhere. Bundles of exposed wires sag between buildings, and at times, we have to walk around them or duck underneath. Nick sighs and scratches his thick white beard. Last week, a boy was electrocuted here. I turn to him, really? I'm trying to imagine a worse death. Yeah, Nick looks around. His voice is softer since we entered the camp. It happened in another part of Borscht. They lose a couple kids a year that way, all over the camp. I'd been to Cairo, Amman, Tripoli, to Damascus, all across Syria, and Borscht al-Barajneh was the poorest, most austere of them all. I traveled across the most hopeless, Hezbollah-controlled parts of Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley to the north, and all the way down to the war-torn border of Israel, recognized on Lebanese maps only as occupied Palestine. And still, the Fourth World was the scariest. Arabic graffiti covers many of the walls here. In places, posters of Arafat and Gaddafi hang loosely from tacks, and as we weave our way through the refugees, I avoid eye contact, though I feel the hard stares. They know I'm Western, and probably sense that I'm American at that. I hope the dirty looks are all I met with today. When I told friends I was coming, most of them tried to talk me out of it. Camps are known for violence, and some refugees blame their problems on the West. The Lebanese government lets Palestinians carry guns for protection, and most of them do. This might be why Nick keeps his head down now and has scarcely said a word since we entered Borscht. I follow him through alleys narrow as hallways, turning right, then left, then right again. Corridors without names or landmarks. Sometimes it feels like our path is just looping back on itself. Other times, side alleys shoot off in different directions and dead end for no reason. Earlier, Nick told me that on his first visit, he had to draw himself a map and bring it with him for weeks before remembering his way, and now I understand why. We take one more left and reach a twisted set of concrete stairs. I follow Nick upward and through a sagging wooden doorway. There, at a cluttered desk, sits a beautiful veiled woman with olive skin and pale green eyes. Marhaba Maryam, Nick says. He tells her something in Arabic and gestures toward me. Iver, he explains. Maryam turns and puts her palm across her chest to let me know she's Orthodox and does not shake hands. I smile, nice to meet you. This is to be the center Nick described to me. Funded by the UN, the place is run mostly by Maryam, who organizes classes and events here. As Nick speaks with her, I look around the room to see Palestinian flags, beadwork and art hanging from the walls. In the corner sits a bookshelf littered with artifacts and knickknacks, carvings and colorful embroidery. I don't understand the meaning behind the art or the symbols on the flags and think how impossible it is to process everything I've seen in the last half an hour. Well, Nick says, turning to me, we better get ready for class. I've almost forgotten the reason I came and suddenly feel nervous to meet 20 Palestinian teenagers whose language I still don't understand. Follow me, Nick says, it's down here. We leave Maryam's office through a door on the left and walk along a tight corridor until we come to another threshold. Nick turns the knob, and there are his students, waiting for him around a cluster of small, dilapidated tables. As we enter the room, they all turn to me and stare. Nick fires a few phrases at them in Arabic, points at me and yells, Iver. Before moving to Lebanon to teach creative writing at the American University of Beirut, I didn't realize how widespread these refugee camps were. I thought they all lay west of the Jordan, but actually, camps stretch across the Middle East. Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, over 3 million refugees struggling to live without citizenship or a country of their own. I told Nick I came to help teach and that I was interested in doing some volunteer work of my own, but I'm mostly here to learn. I've only heard of these camps on TV or in newspapers, and I want to try to understand the Palestinian condition for myself. My friend Jeff from the university used to volunteer at Borscht, and a week ago I asked if he could help me see one of the camps. He made some calls and later said his friend Nick would bring me. 3 days ago, I talked briefly with Nick on the phone, and he told me to meet him at Yune's, a Beirut coffee shop, at 8:45 on Saturday. It was only 4 blocks from the cafe to the bus stop and a 40-minute ride crisscrossing Beirut while my new friend explained how he'd come to work at Borscht. The son of diplomats, he'd spent a few of his formative years in Lebanon, though growing up he'd moved all over the world from China to Brazil. After earning a college degree at Berkeley and a master's from UVA, he'd spent much of his time in the Peace Corps, though he's quick to point out all of his motives were not altruistic. It was that, he told me, or get my head blown off in Vietnam. After the Peace Corps, Nick spent much of his time in Vermont, where he taught various universities and eventually met his wife Mary, a Unitarian minister. by the passionate way he talks about the problems of the Middle East, flinging around his wild mane of white hair with each gesture. It's clear that he's never lost the idealism of youth or his sense of adventure. After the war of 2006, Nick and his wife decided to move back to Beirut, where he would teach English and she would try to start a church. Nick took a job at the American Community School of Beirut and began volunteering at Borsh al-Barajneh on weekends. We both gazed out the window for a moment. Since the bus left Hamra 10 minutes ago, the passing neighborhoods have gradually deteriorated, and some of the worst living conditions I've ever seen reel by in a blur. A block of gray apartment buildings riddled with bullet holes, another block piled high with concrete rubble and twisted rebar. Then suddenly, a beautiful blue mosque, looming above the rundown cityscape, rich, ornate designs completely out of place amidst the squalor. Nick turns back to me. You know, the political implications of what we do at these camps are huge. He scratches his beard. Refugees see that some Westerners actually do care, and who knows, maybe one of them won't grow up to be a suicide bomber. Maybe years from now, an embassy will be spared an attack. He shrugs. There's no way to know. And on the other hand, you should take some time to seriously consider whether or not you want to come back and volunteer on your own. What we do here can be extremely dangerous. A lot of these kids' parents don't want them learning English, the language of the evildoers. Over the phone, Nick had briefly explained that he teaches a class of about 20 teenage Palestinian girls who dream of becoming secretaries. The sad thing is, he told me, probably none of them will ever get the chance. They're not allowed to work in Lebanon, so any job they get is never on record, and their employers can pay them as little as they want or nothing at all. That's if they even get a job to begin with. Most of them will be married off by their parents, and they can only hope their husbands turn out to be somewhat decent men. Nick sighs. These will probably be the poorest people you ever meet. But still, they're just girls. Some are popular, some are socially awkward. I even have class clowns like Sarwat. When anyone from the outside comes in to try to teach them anything, those are some of the few moments in their lives that they actually have hope, and some of the few times that they can simply be themselves, girls. That's all I knew about Nick's students or what he does at this camp before today, and now here I am, fidgeting in front of his class, awkward, out of place. I look around the room, smiling, and the girls smile back. Some wear shawls and veils, traditional Palestinian robes, but just as many are dressed like modern Lebanese teenagers, jeans, t-shirts. One girl's top says, "I love New York." "Take a seat over there." Nick points to the far end of one of the tables, and I walk over and sit down. I try to get comfortable and pull out my notebook as Nick shuffles through some papers. He spouts a few Arabic phrases and passes his handouts around. All Nick has as a textbook is an American travel guide to Lebanon, which he brought last minute before his first class this fall. The book mostly translates phrases between English and Arabic and vice versa, expressions that might come in handy for an American tourist in a coffee shop or restaurant. The irony is not lost on Nick. These are situations his Palestinian students will probably never be fortunate enough to find themselves in. The refugees of Borsh worry all the time about whether or not enough drinking water will reach their camp from week to week. For them, going to a restaurant would be like going to the moon. Even most of the vocabulary on household items is completely foreign and abstract to them. And this is the first lesson Nick hands out. A photocopy from the travel guide, listing things you would find in your house. A picture of a sink with the English word beside it, next to the Arabic word majla. An image of a door with the word Bob beside it. There are about 20 terms on the list: telephone, television, washer, dryer, microwave, window. He goes around the circle of girls. "Okay, Mona, repeat after me. In my house, I have a TV, a couch, and a bed. Pick 3 things in your house and say, 'In my house, I have.' Just choose 3 so you can practice." It's obvious the girls aren't catching every word, but they're quick to imitate. Mona, a tall and slender Palestinian, speaks the words slowly and with a heavy Arab accent. "In my house," she says, "I have a door, a window, and a bed." "Excellent, Mona. Lena, your turn." He nods to the next girl, and she peers down at the handout. "In mine house," she says, "I have a sink, a couch, and a cupboard." Eventually, Nick goes around the entire circle, asking each girl to practice the phrase, None of them ever uses words like television, microwave, washer, or dryer. Nick's next exercise is called At the Coffee Shop and lists phrases you would use to order coffee. There are translations for basic terms like cream and sugar. This time, instead of circling the room in order, Nick picks students at random. Sarah, he says, pointing to an especially young-looking Palestinian, "What do you want in your coffee?" She shakes her head and frowns. Nick says, "In my coffee I want," and Sarah mimics him, but she's obviously confused. "In my coffee I want." There's a long pause and Nick gestures with his hands while pointing at the list. Sarah starts again. "In my coffee I want." She looks down at the handout, sugar and bread. Half the girls laugh. They know what bread means. The other girls are just as lost as Sarah and look around nervously, wondering if they should also giggle. "La," Nick says, "no. Bread is." He pretends to eat something with his hands, and more of the girls laugh. "Okay," he says, "Sarah, what do you want in your coffee?" Nick pulls an imaginary notebook and pencil out of his pocket and gets ready to write. A couple of the girls cover their mouths and snicker. "In my coffee," Sarah says, "I want cream and sugar." "Bravo," Nick tells her, "Tamam, perfect." He pretends to scribble something down on the palm of his hand, then looks to Sarwat. "What do you want in your coffee?" he says. She glances around at the rest of the class and smiles. "In my coffee," she says, "I want a washer, a dryer, and a microwave." The class cracks up, and Nick pretends he's been shot, clutching his chest and falling back in his chair. The girls laugh even harder. "Okay," Nick says, standing up again, "last exercise. We've done this one before. Manager and secretary. Mona and I will start. I'll be the manager." Nick bends his 3 middle fingers and keeps his pinky and thumb pointed out to create an imaginary phone with his right hand. He dials a few numbers on his palm and puts his thumb to his ear, his pinky finger in front of his mouth. Bring, bring. He rolls his R's, and though the girls giggle, Nick remains serious, looking intently at Mona, who makes her own pretend phone and answers. "Hello?" "Hi, Mona. Has anyone called for me today?" She pauses. "Yes, Mr. Abdul." "Oh," Nick says, "what did he want?" Mona is at a loss, but Sarah whispers something in her ear, and I can tell from the girl's new expression that she now remembers what she's supposed to say. "Ah, he wants you fax him paperwork." "Great," Nick says, "I'll do that. Thanks so much, Mona. Bye." He pretends to hang up. "Bye," Mona says, her hand dropping back down by her side. She's clearly proud that she could carry out the conversation, and I am in awe of Nick as he continues around the circle, sometimes pretending to be manager, other times he's the secretary, and the girls ask about calls they've received from imaginary clients or business partners. Later, after his class is finished for the week, I'll follow him out of the camp, trying to remember my own way back to the center for when I decide to return. I'll try to keep up with Nick as he hustles down the airport road toward our bus stop, gesturing wildly with his hands while he wonders aloud over the Palestinian problems. Strategizing possible solutions, though like the maze, all paths seem to loop back on themselves or simply lead to dead ends. For now, I just sit and watch Nick teach, amazed, as captivated as his students. I can't believe a man in his mid-60s has 3 times the energy I could ever muster. Nick finishes classes with a pretend phone call to Sarwat, the only refugee who hasn't participated in the manager and secretary exercise. "Okay," Nick says, "I'll be the manager, Sarwat. You be the secretary." She looks around the room, all the faces of her Palestinian friends waiting for her next joke, but this time she doesn't smile. "La," she says, "no. Today I'll be the manager." Thanks.
Great combination between these two writers.